Senator Xenophon, I think, has to go to another committee, so would you like to take the call, Senator Xenophon?
I'd be delighted, and I'll try and keep it down to 10 to 15 minutes. Sure. Less quibbling, more time I can ask questions. Can I just go to a report in the UK Telegraph on May the 19th? An analysis in the Air and Space Power Journal by Colonel Michael Petruccia says even if funding were unlimited, reasons might still exist for terminating the F-35, and a number of criticisms that I think you're familiar with in terms of range, payload, and that espionage efforts by the People's Republic of China may have compromised the aircraft long in advance of its introduction. Do you have any comments in respect of that?
Yes, Senator Xenophon, Air Marshal Jeff Brown, Chief of Air Force. Look, with the capability as large as JSF, there are always critics out there. Its range, payload and speed is similar to many other fighter aircraft around the world. I think one of the critical things that most people don't get with the capability is how much of a big change it is from fourth generation aircraft. And a lot of it's to do with the fused nature of the avionics and the increased situational awareness that's available to the pilot. So I think if you ask any of our fourth generation fighter pilots, and a number of our pilots have actually flown fifth generation fighters, they're in no doubt as to the capability of the F-35 and its superiority over any aircraft that's on the drawing boards or in existence at the moment.
Well, can I just go to one of our allies, the Canadians? Back in December 2012, the Harper government suspended its plan to buy 65 F-35s after months of criticism in an Auditor General's report that accused National Defence and Public Works in Canada of failing to do their homework and underestimating lifetime costs of these jets. Have you spoken to your colleagues in the Royal Canadian Air Force about their concerns in respect of the JSF?
Definitely, and they don't. I correspond with the Chief of the Canadian Air Force quite a bit, and he doesn't actually have any concerns with the F-35. I think that you'll find that was an area where the Canadian government under-budgeted for the requirement.
So
I think one of the things I'd like to point out is that we put an amount of money aside in the budget in 2003, 11 years ago. We've managed to stay within that same confines of the budget right through to what is now 2014 for the JSF.
So you're saying that the Canadian Auditor General's report was about the budget, not about capability?
What I can tell you is...
The question you asked was the Chief of Air Force of the Royal Canadian Air Force, Senator.
All I can relate...
That was answered, and I moved on to another question.
Yeah. Well, all I can relate is the conversations I've had with the Chief of the Canadian Air Force. I have not read the Canadian Auditor General's report.
So you're saying that project's now on track again, or is it still proceeding in terms of using the JSF?
The project at the moment, since probably for about the last 3 years since it's been rebaselined, has largely stayed on track. That's not to say that there aren't issues with software development and a number of other issues, but it's like any complex developmental project. It will have issues, but they'll be solved as we go through it.
So I guess the concern that's been put to me is that there are a number of commentators, including those with former experience in various air forces, that have expressed criticism of the JSF. For instance, a US Aviation Week magazine analyst in April stated that the JSF capability against VHF radar had been downgraded by the Pentagon, lowering the bar for this so-called stealth fighter. Is that the sort of thing, when those criticisms appear, to what extent is there an assessment, or have you made your assessment and you're getting on with it?
No, we continuously assess the capability, but I'd just like to point out the USAF, USN, US Marines, the RAF, the Japanese Air Force, the Netherlands Air Force, the Korean Air Force and the Israeli Air Force have all ordered the JSF as well as the Turkish Air Force. So I think there's a lot of other air forces around the world have expressed a lot of confidence in the Joint Strike Fighter.
And you're confident in terms of the maintenance costs, the on-costs of the aircraft, that it
Like
won't blow out?
Like any aircraft at this development stage, there are a number of unknowns with the maintainability of the aircraft, but there is a program to continuously improve that as we've gone through. If you have a look at the program, that has occurred, and I expect it to occur. With any new aeroplane, your maintenance costs will always be higher in the initial operating period, and there's almost what we term a bathtub curve that an aeroplane goes through as it goes through its development. So I expect the maintenance costs will decrease as we start to operate.
So you expect it will decrease?
Yes.
Now, apparently, RAAF officers and as well as US officers have spoken publicly about secret weapons or systems to be carried on the JSF that make it unbeatable. Obviously, you can't tell us what that is, but has there been an assessment of the capabilities that you say make it a superior aircraft?
We have always continuously assessed the JSF against what possible threat aircraft are out there. And one of the big factors, stealth is a factor, decreased infrared emissions are a factor, its low probability of electronic emissions is also a factor. But like I said, the biggest factor is that it turns the operator, where you've had to be in aircraft like the F-18 and F-15, you've had to be a sensor operator as well as a fuser. The great advantage of the JSF is that all that information is presented to you as one picture.
But one of the criticisms I know that Dr. Jensen, a coalition member from WA, has expressed concerns as well about this. I mean, can you think of any other major defence acquisition that's proceeded along the lines of the JSF that is a new platform committed to by a government before its capabilities have been verified in testing?
I just only have to go back to our F-111.
They weren't without their problems.
Certainly, but you know, we had it for 37 years and it ended up being a fantastic defence
There
asset.
were some significant teething problems early on.
And the
And
same
never wanted to
people
give
who
it
did-
up.
And the
Sorry?
same people who didn't want us to get F-35 didn't want us to give up F-111.
That's dead right.
Maybe there were,
You know, it's a balancing.
certain representations have been made about the JSF by Lockheed Martin. Are you confident that it will live up to those, to the hyperbole of, or to the representations, use neutral language by Lockheed Martin in terms of the JSF?
I'm not sure I believe any aircraft manufacturer with exactly what they say that they'll produce, but I'm more than happy that that aeroplane will be more than capable and a far better aircraft than our current fourth generation aircraft.
Can I just go to the issue of dogfights that the US Air Force officer in charge of the JSF project, Lieutenant General Chris Bogdan, says the fighting edge of the JSF is its ability to avoid dogfighting with other aircraft, destroying them before they get into aerial engagements. Does that mean that it's a sort of aircraft that is not ideally suited for dogfights in those circumstances? Isn't that the implication of what Lieutenant General Chris Bogdan is saying?
Look, if I was to give you an example, in, let's see, 15 years of fighter flying in major exercises, the only time, or any time that I've entered into a one-on-one fight with another aircraft, I've actually been shot by an adversary aircraft that was probably 10 nautical miles away. So it's not something that you actually want to engage in. Like all aeroplanes, you have advantages and disadvantages at various different parts of the envelope, and you tend to fly your tactics so that you take advantages of where you've got the best part in the envelope. The F-35 is not dissimilar to an F-16 in its performance in the dogfight arena.
Thank you. So going to comments from the US Air Force Chief Michael Hostage, who said, if I do not keep that F-22 fleet viable, the F-35 fleet, frankly, will be irrelevant. The F-35 is not built as an air superiority platform. It needs the F-22. And he goes on to say that he needs the F-22s
Yeah,
So
Senator,
that's about the mix of aircraft.
yeah, look, if I could, I think we're selectively quoting that in.
I'm not trying to. I'm trying to
No,
truncate
I
the
know.
quote.
But I think the context that he was talking about was specifically an upgrade program for the F-22.
But you need a mix of aircraft for that air superiority, don't you?
No, you need a system for air superiority. You need AEW&C. You need a lot of the capabilities we've got, tankers, Vigil Air. It's just not the aeroplane.
Going back to the espionage efforts of the People's Republic of China, has an assessment been carried out to the extent that that may have in any way compromised the aircraft in terms of its superiority and its combatability, in terms of any espionage that may have affected or compromised the aircraft in any way?
Well, like all espionage, it's difficult to know the exact amount, but I do know what some of the limitations are on the Chinese side with their fighter development, and the simple one is engine technology, and they're still significantly behind in.
So you're entirely comfortable about the project?
I am, yes.
Okay. Just finally, because I'm conscious of time constraints, how will there be ongoing, robust, independent monitoring of both the efficacy of the JSF and its and any cost blowouts, or it's being within budget? Is it done within Air Force? Is there any external controls or audits that will ensure both in terms of its capacity to do what it's meant to do, and any cost blowouts are something that will become readily apparent to the taxpayer and to Australians generally?
Well, I think one of the great things about this program is the incredible transparency that's there the entire time. So you've not only got our reporting, but you've got US reporting from DOT&E. We've got good insight into the Joint Project Office, and all those issues are presented to government on a regular basis.
All right. I'll put a number of questions I noticed. I think it's the best way. Thank you for your answers.
Any other questions? Yes.
Thanks. I'll stay on the same subject.
Can you just confirm some of the numbers for us? We'll make sure that open source reporting is correct. Australia, I think, under Minister Faulkner, committed to the purchase of 2 of these aircraft. The government in 2009 committed to 14, although I believe we were still in a position where we could back out of that sale if the aircraft wasn't ready in time. Is that correct? Or additional 12, I should say.
An additional 12.
Yeah, so that takes that up to 14. Commitment of April of this year of an additional 58 takes us up to a total of 72, and speculation about an additional 24, which would take us to a total of 100. For each of those cohorts, 2, 12, 58 and 24, could you outline for us what we are contractually obliged to actually do?
I might be better off handing over to the CEO DMO to actually talk about contractual arrangements.
Okay.
Warren King, CEO DMO. I'll lead off, but Air Vice Marshal Chris Deeble can provide more detail. We actually place orders on a annual schedule.
You're the chair. That's up to you. There's people who've been here all day, so it's up to you. As you wish.
We've actually got a scheduled tea break at this point, so there may be people here who are anxious to use the time for various things. So I think we might just break and come back at past. Thank you. So Hansard's in business, are they? I think if everybody could come back to the table, we're about to reconvene. Thank you.
Now, very well. We've just put a question to the gentleman from DMO, and he's just working his way back. Just to recap,
Mr. King.
Mr. King, the various numbers of aircraft, the 2, the 12, the 58, and the speculative 24 that takes Joint Strike Fighter capability of Australia up to 100 aircraft. I want to know how we get out of those contracts if the aircraft continues to be unairworthy. At what point can we cut and run,
Well,
or can't we?
no, I don't agree with the statement unairworthy, but the way we place the contracts is on an annual buy. We foreshadow in advance the numbers of aircraft we want to buy in a particular year. We then, as that year, progress towards that year, we firm up the price for that year, and then we place an order for that year's buy.
So we don't know how much they're going to cost year to year?
Well, we have some, a lot of the commentary you've talking about...
You don't know what I've read yet?
Sorry?
I haven't mentioned any commentary yet.
Earlier question, I'm sorry, it was another senator, is about the cost of the aircraft, but the costs are now tracking as predicted. And in fact, the most recent costs for the aircraft have been slightly under what has been estimated both by the project and by the independent cost agency of the US.
Let's just work through them. The 2 aircraft that were committed to, I think, by Minister Faulkner, we've effectively purchased those. We've paid for those. Is that correct?
I'm not sure if we pay for it, but we certainly ordered them and they'll be delivered soon.
They're committed. What do you define as soon with a project like this?
Sorry?
When do we take delivery of those aircraft?
July, I think, the first aircraft.
Next month?
Correct.
As in they will be in Australia at that point, or Australian pilots will be training?
No, they're
in the US.
In the US, they remain in the US, and they're used in a pool in the US. It's our contribution to a pool.
But they are legally Australia's aircraft from July. Okay. Tell me about the next 12. How does that work?
Well, the next buy is actually... I'll pass to Air Vice Marshal Deeble to go over the detail.
Air Vice Marshal Chris Deeble, I'm the Program Manager for the JSF program. The next purchase is in low rate initial production 10. We'll make the commitment to that in the 2016 timeframe, and they will be delivered in 2018. We have another commitment. We will commit to LRIP 11 the following year, and they will be delivered in 2019. That will be another 8 aircraft. From LRIP 11, we move into full rate production, and we will be committing to full rate production 1, 2 and 3 in the subsequent years, and we'll deliver 15 aircraft at full rate production. Full rate production 4 will deliver the last 9 aircraft to give us 72 aircraft, and that will be completed those aircraft will be delivered in 2023.
Okay. Given the rather troubled production and design history of this procurement, can we start with the next 10 beyond the 2 that we would take delivery of in July? What if by 2016 they're not ready?
Well, I'll start the answer, Senator. I think the description they're not ready is unlikely because the milestones that have been established for the program, you might recall it was re-benchmarked about 3 or 4 years ago. The project is hitting all those milestones. It's still developmental in only a number of small areas. They're important, but small. And so to be not ready would be would have to require a major setback. But the government's decision is that provided the cost and the capability in Australian industry commitments are met, then we'll place the orders. So if prior to that something went dramatically wrong, we obviously wouldn't place an order. But
And
provided it's making all its benchmark progress, we will.
And do we have the legal ability to avoid purchasing those aircraft if they're too expensive, not airworthy,
Well, we
too
don't,
slow?
we're not legally obligated until we actually place the order.
So, okay, thank you, that's helpful. So despite the Senator Johnson and the Prime Minister's announcement of April, we're still actually only legally committed to the 2 aircraft that we were in 2009, is that correct?
Well, in terms of signing a contract, obviously then the government has made a commitment to progress the project, to buy the aircraft, and only in the event that something was seriously amiss, we will progress the project.
These aircraft were originally scheduled for delivery in 2010, so I guess I'm bringing to you the proposition that something is seriously amiss, or they would have been here 4 years ago.
Senator, you can always say that. Look, I know it frustrates a lot of people, but for most defence projects, they are highly developmental. You just can't buy them off the shelf as if without risk. America and other partner nations have put a lot of money in developing the 5th generation leading aircraft of the world. It did run into a lot of difficulties. They were very public. They are audited in America. But since the rebaselining of the program, cost targets, capability targets, delivery targets have all been met.
All right, let's come to those. Can I just confirm as well the 3 different aircraft types, that all of those that are on purchase by Australia at the moment are the A type that are being designed for the US Air Force?
That's correct.
We're not building or we're not procuring any of these jump jets that the US Marines were after.
That's correct.
Is it correct though that they're all based on the same airframe, and then there's 3 different
Fundamentally
configurations
the same
of-
design with 3 variations. Correct.
Okay. Is it the intention, and maybe we should put this question back to Air Force, that Australia will end up with 1 aircraft rather than having to maintain, train and keep in the air more than 1 of these frontline multi-role aircraft?
Senator, we'll have a mix for quite a while, and there'll be decisions taken in the 2020s as to what the final mix looks like.
Has it not long been the ambition of Air Force to stand everything else down and just end up with 1?
That was the original ambition of Air Force, was to have 1.
When was that ambition superseded?
Probably originally in 2003.
What happened at that time?
Well, at that stage, we had 2 ageing airframes, the F-111 and the F-18. It was decided to retire the F-111 in 2010, and we bought the Super Hornets, 24 Super Hornets, to replace the F-111.
So indefinitely we would still be operating the Super Hornets, the F-35s and the Growlers for the foreseeable future if all goes well?
No, I think there's decision points further down the track in the 2020s as to what the ultimate mix will be.
Okay. Let's come to the announcement. I might have to put this to you, Senator Johnson, because I genuinely don't understand it. You've said that the new jet fighters don't involve any new spending. You assured us that the money is already there. This is going back to your press conference of last April. It's money which successive governments have carefully put aside to ensure our nation's defences are strong. Senator Johnson, can you point to us in the budget papers where this $24 billion has been set aside?
Well, Mr Pryor will take you through it.
As you wish.
Well, Senator, I do apologise. I missed your specific question. What did you say? I'm sorry.
Where has the $24 billion been set aside by previous governments? In what fund or pool or
JSF.
appropriation?
Indeed. Senator, if you were to turn to page 60, this won't be a satisfactory answer.
It's really nice to have that foreshadowed because they so rarely are.
That's right. I thought that. But not satisfactory, not because of my doing, but because of the rules of the PBSs. But
No, that's wonderful. Go ahead.
on page 62 of the portfolio budget statement is the Capability Development Group's expenses statement,
Yeah.
which includes the depreciation charge, which is in PBS language is an approximation of the capital flows for an agency.
The funds set aside for the JSF and other capital items across the future are contained in the budget components for the Capability Development Group. So there's funds set aside in the Capability Development Group for future acquisitions.
For how many years?
The PBSs, this is the unsatisfactory part, perhaps you might say, is currently a 4-year statement.
Yep.
Clearly, we have budget plans that go well beyond 4 years. In fact, go to 10 years. So these statements do not contain budget calculations beyond the 4 years that are required to be put in this document.
So when the Prime Minister said that, referring to the full figure of $24 billion, the purchase and the operation and maintenance of the aircraft, when he said that this money has been carefully put aside, he wasn't referring to the $24 billion at all. What's the sum, I think, from memory, is three and a bit in the PBS?
No, Senator, in our budget, in our budgets in defence, we do set aside funds for future capability acquisitions.
But that money doesn't exist. It could be changed by a future policy decision of government. There's no actual pool of money sitting there.
Senator, as with all budgeting for all Commonwealth agencies, appropriations are only for the year in which the budget occurs.
I'm aware of that.
Yep. So if you are saying, has the Parliament appropriated money for future years?
I.e. set aside.
Has the Parliament appropriated those funds? Clearly they have not. There is no legal appropriation for those funds future. Has there been a budget estimate been made for those future expenditures? Yes, there has been.
Yeah. But anything beyond, anything in the out years is completely imaginary. Could be changed by a policy decision of a future government. There's no big pool of capital sitting there to take us all the way through that acquisition. I know I'm labouring the point, but I actually found that press conference entirely deceptive. It's not like we have a fund set aside to buy these planes, which is exactly the intention the Prime Minister was proposing to convey, I suspect.
I'm not trying to labour the point unnecessarily, but a budget, as you know, is a future expectation of expenditure.
Yeah, which is different to carefully putting something aside. My understanding of carefully putting it aside is that it exists, not that there's a decision for future governments to continue with. Sorry, Senator Johnson.
Well, we don't carefully put aside because the money would just sit there doing nothing. We actually budget so that when the money is appropriated, it is committed pursuant to what the budget says.
Yeah, we're just going to have to agree to disagree.
I think we are.
Can you just take us through, and I don't know whether this needs to go back to Mr King or not, but is there a particular heads of agreement or a written document that we've signed either with the US government or with Lockheed Martin, or what are the actual clauses, what are the conditions that we've signed up to?
There's two, I suppose, in effect, and I'll get the terminology correct. One is we participate in the program. That was a decision made quite some time ago. That's with the US government and other partner nations. The second one we've signed is with Lockheed Martin relating to Australian industry opportunities.
Did the Prime Minister and Senator Johnson's press conference of April bring with it any new document or any heads of agreement or MOU or anything at all with either the US government or the defence contractor?
Didn't need to.
Didn't need to? I didn't catch that.
I'm not sure what you mean by the question, Senator.
Is there anywhere written down the conditions upon which we've signed up the most expensive defence acquisition in the history of the Commonwealth?
I think, Senator, let me just go back to the point that was generally being made before. The government has made a decision that it will build the Air Force based on 72 JSF.
All right.
We have not entered into contract with that. So the only arrangements we have standing at the moment were when we entered into the JSF program in the early days and the arrangements, as Mr King has mentioned, with Lockheed Martin. So the announcement was not saying, and tomorrow we start negotiation for a contract for 58 aircraft. It's the government's intent to build an Air Force based upon 72 JSF, which we will procure in this manner, has been described over time, enter contracts as appropriate when each of those annual purchases are decided upon.
Okay.
But, Senator, could I just add to that?
Please.
Not unusual for nearly all of our defence projects. Essentially, we go back to second pass with the government. with a business case about the costs, the risks, the capabilities to be acquired. The government then approves that, and then the DMO enters into contract negotiations with the supplier. Otherwise, you'd have a supplier before you have an approval. So there's nothing sort of unusual about that approach.
I'm just trying to get my head around not its unusualness, but what is actually going on. That second pass, and what stage of that process you're at now? Second pass has obviously been through Cabinet.
That's right, for these additional purchases. We've already had second pass for the original 14.
Yeah.
But see, just using that as an example, we had approval for the first 14. We haven't gone to contract for all of those aircraft yet because our buy profile is not to be procured until year after next. So we have those approvals in advance of entering into the contract.
But in terms of, and I guess you appreciate why I'm labouring this point, in terms of sunk cost and what is actually committed and spent on this project, it's actually only those 2 aircraft.
Oh, plus some other expenditure.
On some on costs.
Planning
and
yes, so on.
Okay.
And being a member of the development phase.
Yep, understood. Where can I find some written criteria on which the government would decide either to delay or abandon the purchase of the aircraft, either in terms of delays in provision of the aircraft, cost or capability?
I can't find the criteria on which we've worked.
You're in government.
No,
That's a whole separate problem.
No, I'm talking about we've been looking.
Well, you can't, Senator.
Ah.
And there's a very simple reason, in my opinion, but I can't speak for the government here, but if I was being asked for advice from the government, when you try and procure these very complex systems, you have a range of issues that the government of the day will have to consider whether to proceed or not, and to being totally prescriptive about just one element of that decision would give inadequate consideration to the totality of the matters the government of the day would have to consider, which starts with providing Australia with adequate defence.
I suppose I would contest, and many others greatly more qualified than me would contest, that this aircraft can actually do that. That it's been compromised in its design history, which is fascinating, has compromised it. At the outset, that we're attempting to build a fighter that is at once stealthy, can fly at supersonic speeds, is a fighter, is a bomber, can take off and land vertically, and that there is in fact no such airframe that can do all of those things. And that we've bought a jet that's...
Well, no one is. We're not buying an aeroplane that has all those characteristics.
I'm sorry?
We're not buying an aeroplane that has all those characteristics. We certainly don't want it to jump or whatever. We're buying the A version, which is the conventional takeoff and landing version aircraft.
Which has nonetheless been compromised in the design phase by having to satisfy that criteria that the US Marines set down.
Well, that's not necessarily so, I don't think.
Is that completely incorrect?
Well, Senator, if I could...
go ahead.
Sorry, Warren King. I mean, the US, amongst all of our Western friends and suppliers, are the most open about their procurement. Often here we answer to questions from senators about what their operational test and evaluation people have found. All those matters are published, the issues that are facing the JSF, but none of them are at the level that you're discussing. They are at completing the development into the final capability of that aircraft. They're all available, quite available publicly.
Here's something that was available publicly, was that the aircraft couldn't fly within 40 kilometres of electrical storm, and we're proposing to base a substantial number of them in Darwin.
Well,
has that been solved?
I think you're just pulling on comments that were made at certain stages of the development of the aircraft. It's at a certain stage of development, hasn't all the kit or systems fitted in it. So whilst you're doing that, you put some protections around what you do in the aircraft. Would we ever buy an aeroplane that couldn't fly within 40 kilometres of an electrical storm? Believe me, we would not.
So the 2 that we're about to take delivery of in July, has that equipment been reinstalled? Because I believe the equipment that was meant to protect it from lightning was removed because the airframe was too heavy. So the 2 that we've purchased and that we'll take delivery of in July, has that been refitted?
I think you're confusing a couple of issues. The issue around the lightning is just until you do some test points on the aeroplane, that's a restriction you often put on. I actually think at this stage that restriction's been removed. I'd just like to check.
It's in the process of, I think, in fact, I'm attending a conference to be updated next week. But the work on that, as Chief Air Force said, was more a conservative measure. And in fact, our own DSTO did some work on the program to assist in doing that evaluation, and I believe that issue has basically been retired.
Can you just, this all sounds a little vague. We believe this, we're not sure, we might have that. The two aircraft that we're taking delivery of in July in the US, not to be flown to Australia, I guess, have had the lightning fasteners installed.
No, I think you're confusing two issues, Senator. I believe you may be confusing two issues. One was a matter of test data and about where you can fly the aircraft. The other was the removal of a device to lighten the load. I think it was in fuel control or something. So I don't think we didn't remove anything that was lightning protection or something like that. It was a matter of assuring ourselves that the aircraft could fly in that environment safely.
Okay.
I'll get some more information on it.
Yeah, if you can.
I believe it was the gas generator to generate the inert gas in the fuel cells.
Yeah.
The risk of explosion that was removed due to weight.
Yes.
If you feel like the hour's getting a bit late. If you feel like clarifying that on notice for us, but with specific regard to the two aircraft that we've just spent huge amounts of money on, that would be very, very good. There's a fair bit of material. Dr. Jensen's canvassed some of it in the public debate. There's a fair bit of material to the effect that for a Generation 5 aircraft, this slow, it's heavy, and if you get within a certain distance of it, you can kill it. And that effectively its advantage on the battlefield will be that it'll be killing things from over the horizon, that its electronic warfare is superior to anything else on the planet. Is that...
Senator, can I just address...
I can sense your impatience, Air
very
Marshal.
impatient over the
Please go
entire
ahead.
issue because, the majority of commentators who make comment on this aircraft have never flown a fighter in their lives.
Should we need to pass comment on the most expensive acquisition in Australian
You can pass
history?
comment, but I don't think you should be considered in any way expert
I'm not putting myself up here as an
unless
expert.
you've actually, done the job. Now, the simple fact of the matter is that the JSF is faster than either the Classic Hornet or the Super Hornet. Speed is no longer the great determinant in air combat. In fact, if you actually have a look over the history of air combat, 95% of the kills have been taken by 5% of the pilots. The great determinant has been the situational awareness of those individual pilots at the time. The situational awareness of the JSF is contributed by the system around it as well as the aircraft itself. So to make these sort of inane comments about weight, speed and turn rate as being the determinant factors in air combat is frankly irrelevant.
So tell us what's relevant and why this is such a great jet.
What I just said before was the aeroplane is far superior in the level of fusion that it's got in all the sensors.
Just break it down for an amateur,
Okay.
what you mean by that.
Well, for a start, it's a stealthy aeroplane. If it comes up against a fourth generation aircraft, that fourth generation aircraft has no ability to target a JSF. So you have the immediate advantage of your opponent actually can't see where you are.
What about other fifth generation jets then?
And other fifth generation jets are in a similar case because most of those radars at the moment either operate null or expand.
Well, at the moment, what about in 10 years' time when we take delivery of these things?
Well, I think when you have a look at it, there isn't much technology that allow the targeting of missiles outside expand.
But what about 10 or 15 years' time? It's a 40-year acquisition.
Yeah, I don't believe there'll be much change in that. The VHF radars that you talk about, you cannot actually. You need other radar technology to actually track missiles with.
Could you? Don't expect you to have this information at the table, but could you take on notice for us, whoever feels most qualified to provide it, the various criteria by which jets are judged to be the fourth or fifth generation, and which of those criteria the JSF meets and which it doesn't?
We can certainly take that, but I could talk to you now if you wanted to.
Depends how much latitude I'm going to be given by the chair, because I've got a fair bit to cover.
We can take it on notice.
Can we do that? Yeah,
You can
'cause
take it on notice, I think.
it's likely to get fairly technical fairly quickly, so I'd appreciate that. We'll go back to the issues where a number of you had said the jet's back on track. We're not too worried about delays or cost overruns anymore. They've got most of it sorted. There have been a fair bit of discussion in the literature about the buggy software on the aircraft. Is that all now tip-top? Buggy software.
Buggy software.
If speed and turn rate and all the other stuff that you've just dismissed is no longer a factor in air combat, it's now all about electronic warfare and dominance of electromagnetic spectrum.
Senator, I think, let me just pull you up there. You know, it's a matter of degrees. You certainly still need to be able to go at a certain speed, and you still need to be able to turn at a certain rate. But it's the relative importance of the combination. And all jets will have advantages and disadvantages, but a fifth generation jet is far superior to any fourth generation jet out there. I've actually been in the case where I've flown against fifth generation jets in fourth generation jets. And I don't think many of your commentators or anybody that you quote has been in that situation.
Yeah, but we're not here just to take things for granted, and I'm sorry if you're finding this insulting or offensive, but we're not here to just take stuff for granted with a procurement of this magnitude.
That's true, but I will quote again the number of air forces around the world that have actually ordered this aircraft. And what you're fundamentally saying is the US Air Force, USN, US Marines, the Israeli Air Force, ourselves, the Turkish Air Force, and the Dutch and the Italians have got it wrong.
I'm just here
Frankly,
asking
I find that
questions.
insulting.
I'm just asking questions.
Yep,
it's my
that's
job.
fine.
So just tell us about the software then. I'm not sure where that all came from. Has it been debugged and is the aircraft ready to fly?
Well, the aircraft is flying, Senator.
There's 100 of them in the air.
There's a lot of aircraft flying, but it's an incremental build of capability.
Yeah.
The level of software that we want for initial operational capability is called Block 3I for initial. It's currently being mostly written. Software, you know, it's a very large software program, so you don't have this sort of point in time where and this is the same for any software in any big system, where absolutely everything is resolved, but you do have the point where it's a stable, secure, ready for use. At the moment, it's planned, is planned for 2015, 2016 to support the US program. We don't need it until 2020. So even if that assessment is wrong by 6 months or whatever, it will be ready in sufficient time for our use in Australia.
So what are we taking delivery of in July?
An aircraft with a lesser baseline, but remember the software can be added.
A lesser baseline of what? What
Software.
won't it do? What can't it do that the aircraft will be able to do in 2020?
I'll pass to
Thanks.
Marshal Deeble.
Senator, the aircraft will be delivered in the July time frame with the 3I software.
3I.
3I. There is some delays to elements of that at this point in time, and we're working through that. But I envisage there's only about 3 to 6 months worth of delay. That won't delay any of the training or otherwise that we will undertake. Currently, to declare IOC in the 2020 timeframe, we can accept 3I or 3F. 3F is running slightly delayed at this point in time at around 6 months. And again, we have plenty of scope. It was due to be delivered at the end of 2017, and we won't bring the aircraft back to Australia until the end of 2018. So we have some scope in the schedule to cater for any delays in that software.
But just to be clear, Senator, through the life of this aircraft, there is already planned a Block 4, and it'll go on for the life of the aircraft.
Yeah.
That is just the nature of modern systems. It exists in all of our platform systems, in our ships and our aircraft. software-based. They are always being upgraded, tuned, improved capability.
No, I understand that. But at what point does the US government, or does Lockheed Martin for that matter, consider the aircraft's actually ready for combat? When would you...
Lockheed Martin doesn't play in that space. Lockheed Martin is a supplier.
Okay.
It's the US forces that determine when a capability is ready for operational capability.
And what's their date?
Well, it depends on whether it's the Marine version, the Air Force version.
No, of the one that we're buying.
Well, we'll actually make our own determination that it's
Sorry,
ready
you just
for
told me it was the US government. So at what point will you make a determination then? When will this aircraft actually be ready? If the July ones that we're taking delivery of still have unfinished software.
We need to have it ready for initial operational capability by 2020.
So we're going to be flying the aircraft for 6 years before it's actually ready.
Senator, it's...
What am I missing?
One of the most complex parts of this airframe is actually the training. So currently at the moment I have pilots qualified on F-18s. So those initial 2 aircraft will actually go into a training pool in the United States, and we'll start to cycle some of our F-18 qualified people through there so that we can actually establish enough pilots to establish the first squadron.
Senator, one of the important points about making a decision now in the nature of our future Air Force was to allow us to do the detailed planning to train our pilots, to develop and build our facilities, to put our training systems and our maintenance systems in place in Australia. So it's not just the airframe. So moving to now to get that IOC, the IOC is defining the whole of that fighting capability, not just what an aeroplane can do. So we need this time to make a fairly significant transition, and you've heard the Chief of Air Force talk about the difference between Generation 4 and Generation 5 aircraft. It's a completely different way of thinking about how we're going to fight into the future with this aeroplane, and we have a lot of highly integrated program, or a lot of programs which needs a high degree of integration to bring the capability into play. So I don't think you're missing anything other than understanding it's just not the platform, it's all the systems that we have to put in place, workforce and so forth, to sustain it once we have it in play.
I've seen a briefing by Boeing, which I acknowledge at the outset was a competitor way back when the US government was trying to work out what to do, that highlights the F-35's vulnerabilities to radar detection. So what can you tell us about how stealthy this aircraft actually is, and how something as solid and lumpy and immovable as an aircraft can keep up with the evolution or the arms race in detection? How can you keep it stealthy as detection technologies mature over a 30 or 40 year period?
Well, Senator, I can start. It's fundamentally engineered to be stealthy against the radar frequency environment. And clearly we're not going to go into in a public hearing the specifics of that. But let me put it another way. If you don't start with a stealthy aircraft, how are you going to make a 4th generation one undetectable? I mean, the question is always with the purchase and acquisition of arms that it's designed to be as capable as it can today and with a path to the future. JSF is our best starting point for that. Any other aircraft you start with starts from an even worse position.
So I don't expect you to go into too much detail, I guess, given the sensitivity of what we're discussing, but it's kind of all over the defence literature that the F-35 will be able to be detected by Russian and Chinese radar systems that are in the development cycle. So I'm still not at all clear how an aircraft like this keeps pace with evolution in those technologies.
I don't believe that there'll be an aircraft fitted with a radar that'll have the ability to detect it. And stealth is just more than the radar factor. It's the infrared signature, and it's also the electronic emissions that come out of the aircraft, which can be just as important as the overall radar signature. So there's low probability of detection. Electronic emissions are an important factor as well. So there's actually sort of 3 areas when you talk about stealth. So it's not just against radars.
Just spell out those three.
Sorry?
Just spell out those three for us.
Okay, so
the emissions from the aircraft itself.
Well, low electronic emissions from the aircraft, a low infrared signature, and a low radar signature.
And the radar signature is the shape.
Shape, materials, there's a lot of factors that go into it.
And are you confident, given what you've said, some of its other performance characteristics are, lower than they might be? You've made the point that the stealth is all important and the fact that it can kill you from a very long way away, or the fusion, I think, as you put it. How confident are you in the stealth characteristics of the aircraft?
I'm extremely confident in the stealth characteristics of the aircraft. It's comparable to an F-22, which has proven to be a good fifth-generation fighter. And they are very difficult for anybody else to replicate.
Can you just spell out for me, Senator Xenophon put a quote to you before, General Mike Hostage, February 3rd of this year, Chief of US Air Combat Command, so not a Green senator, somebody with a bit of skin in the game, who said, if I don't keep the F-22 fleet viable, the F-35s will be irrelevant. It's not built as an air superiority platform. Now, that's all very well for the US Air Force, because they have both of those aircraft. We don't, and we probably never will. What's your response to that comment, that the F-35 is somewhat defenceless by itself?
Senator, I'd actually like to get the rest of the comment, and if we could take that one on notice, what I'd like to do is get the full comment back to you and we could read the entire...
By nature, it is somewhat out of context?
Yeah, it is well and truly out of context.
I'll put that reference to you through the Secretary. We'll come back on this later. Thanks, Chair, for your patience.
Thank you, Senator Ludlam. We're now on Senator Conroy.
Thank you. The breadth of the questions has covered off quite a lot of the questions I was going to ask there, but I did want to follow up. You've been very emphatic that Generation 5 against Generation 4 is not a contest. Are there any other than the countries you've named, have any other countries developed a fifth generation fighter capacity that you're aware of at this stage?
The Chinese have 2 aircraft in development, and the Russians have an aircraft as well. But the way I'd characterise that development is that the JSF flew 2 prototypes probably 10 to 12 years ago, and that's about where both those aeroplanes are at the moment. So there's a fair bit of work to be done on both those, all 3 aircraft. I don't believe that either of those 3 aircraft have the same stealth characteristics of an F-35.
Okay. I've read claims that the Russian and the Chinese planes claim to be as good. You're making the point that they couldn't possibly be because they're at such an early developmental stage. Have any countries in our region bought? I mean, China by definition is in our region, but have any other countries bought into either of those platforms?
Nobody's bought into the Chinese platforms, but the Indians have got a co-development project with the Russians on the PAC 50.
And Indonesia?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Let's assume they develop theirs, albeit a 10 to 12 year timeline, possibly faster. How does a 5th generation plane fare against a 5th generation plane? As I said, you've been very, very emphatic. 5 versus 4, not worth talking about. Criticism, unfounded. 5 versus 5, where do we stack up there?
Well, again, I don't believe that those platforms reach the same level of 5th generation capability that we're talking about with an F-35. And if I was just to give you a comparison, because the commentariat out there, which people love to quote, often talk about aircrafts like the Su-30 MKI, and they actually say that they've got an advantage over our current 4th generation fighters. I can pretty much emphatically state that that is not the case. And in fact, unlike the majority of the people that comment on these things, I've actually flown Su-30 MKIs. So I've actually been in these aeroplanes. I've been able to make my own assessment of their capability against the capability of the 4th generation aircraft that we fly.
Now, apologies for ignorance, that's a fourth generation or fifth generation?
That's probably the best of the Russian fourth generation aircraft. And there are deficiencies in those aircraft compared to our aircraft and the systems that we operate.
Right. So you think that sort of...
I think that
those
differential...
deficiencies, thank you, differential will be replicated when you move into the fifth generation?
Yes.
And is that on a software basis? Is that on a hardware basis? Is that on a stealth technology basis?
I think on two bases, probably stealth technology, the inability to have low probability of detection on electronic emissions, and engine technology as well, with whether both the Russians and Chinese are significantly behind Western engines.
Okay. Do the Russians claim there's a fighter in the, and apologies for this, hopefully you can help with the terminology, a more traditional fighter style plane, more of a Raptor F-22 style, or is it designed to have the same capabilities as the Joint Strike Fighter?
No, I think that they would like to see it as a pure fighter aircraft. At the moment, I'm not aware of any air-to-ground munitions that it's able to drop.
Right. So they, I mean, as you said, the commentariat, others have made the comment that they believe that the ultimate Russian fifth-generation fighter will be superior as a fighter aircraft to our fifth-generation
Can I just
plane.
give you an example? We actually did an exercise probably about 3 months ago. Again, this is with the Super Hornets. They have 4.5 Gen with an AESA radar. It was against a specialist aggressor squadron from the United States. I think the kill ratio was in excess of 20-1 in favour of the Super Hornets. So I'm pretty confident, given the training that we do and the knowledge that we've got of these systems, and that's why I tend to dismiss the commentariat out of hand.
Okay, thanks. Just a couple of slightly more boring topics to do